Hey, it's Bob. Welcome back to the show. Today on Elevate Your AIQ, I'm joined by someone I always learn something new from every single time we talk, Sandra Loughlin, Chief Learning Scientist at EPAM. I had the good fortune to meet Sandra in person earlier this year, and we've spoken a few times since. Every conversation leaves me thinking differently about how humans, organizations, and AI evolve together. And I'm so glad we were able to record this one for everyone's benefit. Sandra brings her signature clarity and perspective to topics like AI-enabled productivity, the real timeline for workforce transformation, synthetic agents, digital twins, and what leaders consistently get wrong about change. I don't have a good Thanksgiving or Black Friday pun for you, which actually you should be thankful for. See what I did there? Seriously, Sandra is super smart, and I know you'll find this to be an insightful, deeply practical conversation. So break away from the family and the doorbuster sales for a bit and settle in. Thanks for listening to the show. I really appreciate it. Let's go chat with Sandra. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Elevate Your AIQ. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with Sandra Loughlin. How are you doing today, Sandra?
I'm great. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. You and I have caught up a few times this year. Transform, I think, is where we first
Yes.
met face to face. And then we saw each other at
HR
HR
Tech?
Tech.
Yeah.
And yeah, here we are, fourth quarter already. It's crazy. Before we get into the weeds, you could just give my listeners a little bit about you and your background and your role at EPAM.
Sure. So I am the chief learning scientist at this company called EPAM Systems that probably few have heard of. It is a 65,000 person, $5.5 billion software engineering professional services company. So what this means is that Fortune 500 companies hire us to come and help them build very complex digital data and AI based platforms. So a lot of the apps that people interact with on their phones, in their cars, at work are things that EPAM has helped develop, but we don't sell our own products.
So you have partnerships with, a lot of vendors, I imagine, that
Yes.
pull together different
Yes.
things. Yeah. And are you targeting, Fortune 500 companies or mid-market, or where do you
No,
sit?
we work in at top of the bracket. So in fact, a lot of our biggest clients are digital natives. So the disrupting companies that really came about in the past like 10, 15 years. So we do a lot of really very high-end engineering work for those kind of organizations too.
Okay. So is it that they don't feel like some of these projects that they're just not within their core, competencies, or like seems like these are the people that would be able to spend the money for the right talent, and yet
Yeah.
you guys have been quite successful partnering with them anyway.
So it depends. So if we're talking like typical enterprises, insurance companies, automotive companies, healthcare, life sciences, they tend to hire us because our engineers are very specialized and they don't tend to have a lot of them. And so they will hire us to kind of expand their bench, but also to help them reimagine products, imagine new products, like really be, serve as the experts in complex product development as well as the helping hand. So that's why that kind of group would hire us. Digital natives hire us because we have as good engineers as they do. So think like the big, names. We do a lot of the core platform engineering with them on their products, and our people go back and forth to big names because the quality of the engineering at EPAM is very similar.
Okay, got it. That's helpful. You and I have had a couple interesting conversations that I wanted to sort of dive deeper into. But one of them, I guess, sort of a lead in to that is some of your recent posts on LinkedIn talking about like where companies are getting transformation wrong. Maybe just leaning into some of those headlines around either, I think it was Forrester, predicting that half of the HR team is going to go away, and then people sort of misrepresenting or misreading headlines around AI's actual role in job displacement being sort of the scapegoat. So I thought we could sort of unpack some of those things that are going to sort of bleed into some topics that we've been talking about. But I mean, just starting with, I guess we'll start with one of the recent ones around the job job loss being attributed to AI and why that is just really, I guess misleading and dangerous to make those kinds of statements.
So it's because there's kind of a logical fallacy occurring here. So you have boards and CEOs and executives, right, seeing AI is helps with productivity or AI can help with productivity. And then they are also seeing headlines of, big companies like Amazon and Microsoft and a bunch of Accenture, right, who are dramatically cutting headcount and attributing it to AI. And so to an outsider, it looks like those headcount reductions are because of the productivity increases of AI, but that is not actually true at all. So what I posted was a fantastic analysis by someone at Gartner, but it's not only his, it's been looked at elsewhere as well. But essentially a lot of the layoffs are attributable to AI in that the companies are needing to spend money on AI, and so they're cutting headcount to allow that to happen, not because AI has been more productive, they just needed the funds, or they're using AI as an excuse for business-driven cuts, right? But only about 1% of the layoffs that have been publicized have been as a direct result of AI actually creating productivity value for organizations. It's primarily other reasons. Now, I take care to say, and I think everyone, who in this space would agree, we will see headcount reductions based on productivity from AI. Like I think AI is going to dramatically change productivity of current jobs, and it will change some jobs altogether. But that is a much slower process than I think a lot of people realize. So to get productivity gains with AI, you have to actually think about work from a value chain perspective, meaning like tasks, which is kind of what AI does. All tasks exist in some sort of process or workflow. And those processes and workflows, they tend to cross roles and they often cross divisions in organizations. So they're very, very complicated. So if you were to come in and bring AI to do steps 3 and 6 of a complex process, you're not going to get faster at the process because work just backs up at steps 4 and 7. So like to see productivity value from at the broader level, you have to actually re-engineer the process. You have to kind of like see the work back up, think, okay, we can try to change the process somehow, iterate on that, try it out, see if it works, right? And you do that a few times and you actually figure out what the new process is. But you're still not done because then you have to look at all the different roles that you have and like the nature of some of those roles will have changed. So you now need to redefine the roles, educate the people, right? Change incentive structures and tooling, right? Then only when all that stuff is done will you see actual productivity gains at the value chain level versus what I think a lot of people are imagining right now.
Yeah, so that aligns to some of the things that I guess many have witnessed for quite a while. But when we first started talking about productivity gains from AI, a lot of that was really just automation, right? So they've just sort of folded everything that companies have been doing for the last decade into the AI, big tent, right? And so some of that's just sort of a terminology, misperception to a degree. But to the non-technical person, it's all non-human, execution of those tasks, right? So if we leave it at that, I mean, one of the things that we'll get into was when we talk about AI literacy is first of all getting an understanding of some of those different basic terminology, but some of it is also stresses on the need for us to sort of lift, you know, rising tide lifts all boats, right? If you've got one person who's just way ahead of everyone else because they've applied AI, even if it's automation, to their own work. So now you have one person, let's say they go 5x or 10x, but everyone else is going 1x. Something's going to break. You're certainly not going to your point, Sandra, like you're certainly not going to see end to end gains in, oh, now we can hire this much faster or do, performance management this much faster, whatever the workflow or the process is, you're just not going to see those gains until you can start to basically string assistants and agents and automation together in a sort of an agentic, workflow. And perhaps similar to the actual job displacement numbers from real AI, it probably aligns pretty closely to the organizations that are mature enough to have an agentic workflow.
Yeah, and
Is
that's
that fair?
not many companies, and even for the ones that exist, it's not in many areas. Like so, the most well, at least the most, if not tied with the most advanced area with AI from a productivity gains perspective is going to be software engineering, right? Software engineering is one of the first places where we're seeing really significant impact. But we're just starting to see this now, and it's not at scale. So a lot of the productivity reports that people are sharing are about, again, a specific step in the software development lifecycle. So yeah, you can get super fast at like this step, but your whole value chain is not increasing or not decreasing. What we're starting to see now in software is that re-identification of the new engineering process. And we're looking at what are the new roles, and the data infrastructures are being developed. And so this is why I say like productivity gains will absolutely be had, and they're going to start first in software. But even like the big huge software companies are not seeing this at scale. That's just not the case. It's we're just too soon in the cycle. And so even the, most advanced digital natives are still not that advanced in this area yet. A lot of it's a data problem, and they have as big of a data problem as pretty much everybody else.
Yeah, I'm seeing similar. It's not the same exact situation, but it's sort of analogous when I think about what I see in like the, freelance, entrepreneurial, space where people aren't necessarily working with, big teams and, collaborating across divisions and have these, sort of mature processes. You still have the situation where there's so much tooling out there that it looks like, oh, look at all of these things that we can do. And of course, there's marketing dollars being thrown at that. Like, look at how easy it is to spin up a business. And like, if only it was that simple. So I just feel like there's still, no matter where you go, you can't escape this feeling of sort of a gluttony of tools and technology. But it takes a lot more than that to actually execute a process that meets everyone's expectations in terms of the experiences that we deliver, certainly the veracity of the data that's going into these these different AI systems. And so much easier said than done. And a lot of what gets lost in an enterprise workflow is just the value, not the time necessarily, but the value and the importance of some of the human, judgment and the handoffs that happen in between some of these tasks to really get to, this sort of human and AI, synergy and optimization, I guess.
Agree. And I would also say expertise, right? So what, the one of the biggest things that we're seeing now, which is not at all surprising, is that when you're taking just a generic large language model and applying it inside organizations to do any sort of even semi-complex task, it's not performing well because it's been trained on like Reddit. Like it's not actually that sophisticated on anything really. It's really good at general tasks. But what companies need are experts who know stuff outside of the organization and also know the organization, right? What I find fascinating, and again, we're seeing this now in software, is what are called synthetic agents. So these are basically you take a large, there's a couple ways to get them, but the most common one is take a large language model and you fork it. So you like make an instance of it. And then you essentially take a team of actual human experts in learning science, in claims management, in whatever, and they further train that on just on learning science or just on claims management, and they do it over and over and over and over again. And so they actually create a, a Gen AI expert in learning science that has a similar judgment on typical tasks or typical questions as an actual human expert. That's what's coming out now. So these are being developed now very broadly in every field. They haven't really hit the market yet. But that is like that's what I think people should be imagining when they're thinking about AI. Not AI as ChatGPT to help me write my emails or Copilot to help me build a deck. It's actually those synthetic agents that will be the most disruptive. And when you think about that, I mean, that's already pretty scary, I think. But imagine then that agent, like the learning scientist, just like Sandra, who knows what Sandra knows, going in and being hired, take whatever, by a company who's then further trained on all of the data on the company, like all of the knowledge base, all of the client information, like on more information than any human could actually take in. Now you have your synthetic agent trained in a very specialized area, also trained on business data. That's where things get really interesting.
Agree, scary. So when companies are putting out these agents, I just want to elaborate on some of the examples or the non-examples that you gave, that this is not a co-pilot, et cetera. So if a company, let's say it's a marketing startup, they say, oh, well, we've got a business development rep agent, and we've got a booking agent, and we've got a customer service agent, and we've got basically we've got a new agency, as it were, of like 12 different agents, and they're all specialized in these. Those are really just, they have sort of generic, sort of expertise in that particular role based on some generic job descriptions, and hopefully they have some connection to each other, right? So they can do some of the handoffs, but completely lacks true sort of enterprise, domain expertise. It's just a very sort of surface level, task based kind of assistant. Is that fair?
It depends. So you can actually have a learning scientist synthetic agent that is just trained on cognitive science, right? And so they're really, really good and they're very, very deep at cognitive science. Or you have them trained on motivation, or you have them trained on all kinds of sub things. Or, and that's going to be like that's one kind of agent. You could also have a synthetic agent trained on just that customer, like it knows everything about that customer. So it's, we can't, human expertise, we often think of in terms of domain, but actually from a synthetic expert perspective, what will likely make more sense is creating agents who are even more specialized than a human, like very, very, very specialized, because then they know a certain amount of context and they will operate in that context. The trick will be to make them not operate outside of that context. But that, I think, is what we're seeing. So I don't know that they're going to be generic. I think actually they would be much more specialized than we're seeing right now.
So comparing this synthetic agent to a digital twin, which I know is another phrase that people kind of use in different ways, but if there was a digital, trying to differentiate between the synthetic expert that starts to encroach on becoming, a digital Sandra or digital Bob, versus a digital twin that is explicitly built as a digitized encapsulation of, someone's, knowledge and expertise, and potentially, relationships, I suppose, as well. So at what point are these synthetic agents just basically sort of running cover for what you're essentially doing, which is codifying, your top, possibly highly compensated, experts, and you're just going about it a slightly different way?
they're not the same. So a synthetic Sandra, right, is just trained on Sandra's knowledge. Like I have somebody made one for me. They made a version like a Sandra GPT that they like load all my stuff into. So that knows what I know, let's just say. But I am not an expert in every aspect of my field, right? I actually have like super deep and a unique perspective on certain elements, but I am not the same as other learning scientists, even who come out of my same program, in a similar time frame. So a synthetic expert is going to be not the same as a digital twin because a digital twin is just trained to reflect one person or one role, right? Not necessarily on a broad set of expertise. So they're both experts, but one is an expert in not trained as a person or a reflection of any one or even two people. It's trained on a body of expertise, whereas a digital twin is trained on a person. And their digital twins are what I think a lot of people don't realize is that their organizations are incentivized to make digital twins of them with or without their consent. Because and if you think about it, like if I were running a business, it kind of makes sense. Like I need to know what people do all day long. I need to know that. I should know that now and I don't, but I need to. And the way that I'm going to get that information is by collecting log files and like looking at conversations and collecting all of the data that is in my systems today that I already own. And then, like, an easy example is like, oh, someone is out on maternity leave. She has like really important knowledge. We have to get that from her. Let's just ask her twin, right? But that easily goes down a darker path, right? So this whole concept of digital twins and synthetic experts is where I don't have an answer for it, but I just think that most people, when they talk about AI, are not thinking about that kind of AI, and they should be, because that's really where we're going to see disruptions to the human workforce.
I totally agree. I think this is where it's like,
Hey, we're the payroll baddies, and our mission is to make payroll fun and relatable.
And call out industry when we hear it.
You gotta call it out. You gotta call it like you see it. But we also gotta shine a light on all those unsung payroll heroes out there, making sure we get paid.
Yeah, those are the real payroll baddies out there, and we love sharing their stories and showing them love.
With gold chain and everything, baby.
By the way, SAP is the best payroll out there, and if you don't like it,
Get
I don't want to scare people even more than they're scared now, but that is when you need to start. Well, we want them to be proactive and take control of their own career and destiny ahead of time and start planning for that now, which is sort of the theme of this show. But yeah, as soon as AI starts to be, a sort of a team member and starts to do some of the things beyond just, task by task kinds of things, including expertise and perspectives and things like that, then you absolutely should be worried. One of the things I was thinking about as you were talking about the synthetic agent is that if it has more than the individual perspectives that would otherwise be sort of a twin, I start to think about decision making and how AI is already in some ways acting in the decision support kind of role for a lot of activities. And what does this mean for the aggregation of cognitive diversity and collective intelligence if a single synthetic agent could basically encapsulate collective intelligence of a profession, at least like within a profession, within an industry, perhaps something along those lines.
So this is where I think it actually there's much better story for humanity here. So I know learning science, so I can speak to that. There is no right answer. Like what learning science, when you become like a true expert, what you realize is that there are competing perspectives on everything, like deep and rich and well researched on many different topics. And you still need to apply judgments to decide how to move forward. And so I don't, so this, and I'll just take, Sandra GPT, right? I love Sandra GPT. I ask her for help in writing stuff, but I always rewrite it. Not because it's because real Sandra is learning new things. Real Sandra, realizes that all the stuff that's out there in the world is not quite as nuanced as she wanted it to be for this, particular conversation. And so I, at this moment at least, do not feel threatened even by what I understand of what this can be and what I have seen thus far for my role, because AI can't actually reflect my expertise when it comes to looking at a highly complex decision and needing to, or a situation and needing to make a decision. And here's the other good news for humanity, I would say, is I think it comes to the context. So the context for any real business situation is extremely nuanced, right? And there's many layers, there's many dimensions. And then there's also some degree of like gut, right? And pattern recognition from the past. In order for AI to truly act autonomously, it would have to have all of that context that's already been validated, all the extraneous, complicating, noisy data removed, right? No company has that kind of data. No company. And I don't see them getting that anytime soon. And so even when it comes to synthetic agents and digital twins, I still think they're going to be largely acting as you said, like decision support, where they are helping to pull information, they're asking questions, it's giving some drafted ideas. But at least for the time being, you're still going to have a significant amount, if not indefinitely, a significant amount of human oversight. Now, for things that are less complicated, for things where the context is relatively straightforward to document, where it's relatively clean, that you're going to see over time become automated or agentified or whatever the word is. But that is a big portion of certain jobs. There's no question. And so that's where I would be nervous, right? I think everybody is. But I don't think that is going to extend to all jobs or even most jobs. It's a subset.
Sure, that's a little bit of a relief for our listeners. Yeah, I mean, it's scary because I start thinking about the ways in which it could gather some of that additional context, right? I mean, it's people have, AI reading all their emails, right? It's reading their Slack messages. It's picking up on some of these signals and, could potentially start piecing some of that together. It's not the exact same, but, as that itself matures, and if it was, if there were humans in that loop as it was sort of learning some of that, like what's a strong versus a weak signal, what are signals that maybe cancel each other out or amplify the signal. I mean, there's a lot, because I think about some of the things I worked on at IBM kind of in the same time I was doing a lot of research around collective intelligence and crowdsourcing. Even prediction markets are coming up a lot these days, and we were looking at that almost 20 years ago. But how do you, as companies think about like social listening, social analytics, and all this unstructured data on top of all the structured data that we have, and you start listening, I mean, we've got AI note takers on every meeting, AI interviewers, like on top of all the, webinars and whatever calls, everything's being recorded and transcribed now. And so AI starts, analyzing all that, and it just starts to get smarter and smarter. So, I'm not trying to scare people more. I'm just trying to play out, some of this in a logical fashion, because things are moving, pretty fast. So, I mean, just as you know, you and the team at EPAM are building some of these synthetic agents, I'm thinking about, what else is coming in an enterprise context that people should be worried about and learning about and getting ahead of, so that we can steer some of these developments in a constructive and responsible direction, right? Are we being responsible by design as we even think about what to build before we let AI actually go off and build it with the rest of our software engineers, whoever's left?
Yeah. I mean, in theory, yes. So what you're saying, I mean, in theory is absolutely true. I've, from experience now, I mean, not that I do this for my job, but I see it done at EPAM a lot. I think people seriously overestimate how hard it is to do what you just described, both from a data perspective and model training perspective and cost perspective. So yes, in theory, it's 100% possible. I just there's also going to have to be a calculus at the business level of is it worth that much? Because again, there's so much that goes into building and maintaining and evolving and cleaning all of the data, coordinating all the data, right? It will take years for AI to actually have access to all of that cleaned up, coordinated data for most organizations, just because it's such a mess right now. And again, and then you'd have to ask so here's my thought, right? It's going to take years for the data actually to get cleaned up. So that's modern, normal enterprise. There are two big things that I also think of when it comes to this space. So the first is, and this is the scary one, and then the hopeful one. The scary one is AI natives. So these are companies so digital natives are companies like Amazon and Google and Uber and Facebook and all these companies that were developed with the internet basically being at their center, as opposed to older brands that had to tack it on. These companies, none have emerged. No big ones have really emerged yet. They're all being developed right now in every industry. So every single incumbent, I think, is likely facing a version of that. But none of them have come to the market yet. But when they do, they will be designed as data-first companies. People think AI, I think it's technology. It's actually just it's the data is the foundation. If you have good data, you have good AI. If you don't have good data, you don't have good AI. So I think they are the ones who are going to be more likely to have exactly what you're describing here from a data infrastructure perspective and an ability to derive incredibly complex patterns. And because they will be starting that way from the beginning, they won't have historical data that they don't have access to because it lives in someone's head or whatever. So I think, that they're the ones that I'm actually scared of, because if they are successful in recreating incumbents' products and services at the same level or higher quality, and they're significantly less expensive to operate, then what that means is that they can come in and grab significant market share simply because they'll have a much cheaper, equally good or better product. That's the scary part. The happy, positive side that I think about as well is the fact that it will take years for AI natives to come in and disrupt. That will take time. Incumbents, it will take time to get their data cleaned up. This is all time where where we're figuring out what other work humans can do with AI. Right now, all we can see is where AI will do what we understand today. What we have a much harder time seeing is what it will afford that we haven't imagined yet. And that will also take time to evolve. And it will only come through, sadly, leaning into AI and actually iterating processes and figuring out what it affords and coming up with new ideas for how it can be used, right? So it's almost like the thing that is disrupting us can only benefit us if we lean into it. Because if we don't, just like the digital, right? Like digital marketing didn't exist. And now it's a massive field, but the people that leaned into it were the ones that actually pioneered that field and figured it out so that old school marketing kind of transitioned into this digital marketing. I think you're going to see the same thing with AI across every sector.
I don't want to get into like geopolitics, but that mirrors what I was reading about in terms of, the US versus markets like China on AI adoption, right? So we're scared. We've got, these misleading, dangerous, marketing, statements. We've got, headline making stories that maybe they're sensational, maybe there's some truth to it. We don't know, but our sort of comfort level with AI in general is far behind the Chinese society. And that's going to have significant, implications as far as how quickly we can really get the real story and get people comfortable with that story. And part of that is, goes back to just foundational literacy and everything from being able to spot those sensationalist, gaslighting kinds of headlines all the way through people experimenting on their own and seeing firsthand how they need to apply their critical thinking on top of whatever AI is telling you.
Yeah, it's so scary. It's like, I don't know. You know those, okay, you were in camp and you had to do like those trust activities where you had like two people and they held hands and they had to walk further and further back. It's kind of like in order for us to succeed with AI, it's like we have to lean into the thing that is incredibly scary to us and trust. And it is a trust thing that it will be okay. And we don't know. To be honest, like we don't know, right? All we know is that for the entirety of human history, every time there's been some sort of new, just like technological advancement, we've come out okay in the end. Like, if all of human history predicts the future, which it might not, but let's just say it does, right? We will create as many or more jobs than we disrupt. But in order to figure out what those new jobs are, we have to muck about with this scary thing that we don't fully understand. Like it is an incredible catch-22. It's like it's like, and it makes sense that people are nervous, and I get it. Like I'm nervous, but at the same time, I think my personal approach is like I'm going to just trust, because if it all goes to crap, I will choose to live in the matrix. I will not take the red pill or whatever. I would take the blue pill, like personally. So, I figure like we're going to come out okay in the end, regardless, whether it's a real okay or a perceived okay. Like I'm leaning in on that future.
Yeah, it is hard. I mean, there's so many reasons to not trust it, but it's not just trust in the technology, right? It's trust in ourselves. It's trust in how we can, rely on each other. Can you rely on this person? Where did they get their expertise? Did they get it from an untrusted AI? I mean, we've just got to have our detectors, our BS detectors on, and retain some of those, human durable skills like critical thinking to know, just as we do in life, we've got to know whether people are, full of crap or not. Is this person trustworthy or not? So I think there's a lot of different types of sort of trust relationships. How convenient that I wore my
Oh, look at you.
trust
Hey, I
hat.
didn't notice. So I will also say, I think there's also a contrast between what is theoretically possible with technology and what humans can do and will allow to be done. So let me just give you like an example. So we talk all the time about how AI is going to come in and do the boring stuff that nobody wants to do. Like that sounds great until you realize that the human mind cannot handle complex work for like super long periods of time. So it is actually a physical impossibility that we're going to take an 8-hour workday where we have different, variable amounts of complex stuff from boring to really intense, cognitive work, and replace all of it with highly intense cognitive work. The human mind cannot sustain that. And so I think that there is a physical limit to actually how much we're going to adopt AI, because in order for our brains to work, we need stupid, boring stuff like driving or taking a shower or entering crap. We need this in order for us to have the best ideas, for us to survive, and for us to be sane. Also,
have you ever wondered what really makes a generation tick? Who gets to pick the name? And why the slang keeps changing? Don't worry, I can help. My name's Dr. Megan Grace. On #Gen Z, I share the voices and experiences of Generation Z, how they're different from other generations, what moves them, and why they do what they do. In each episode, we go beyond the buzzwords and the stereotypes to dive into real conversations and the insights that matter to making intergenerational collaboration a reality. You can catch #Gen Z on the Work to Find podcast network and wherever you listen to podcasts.
Humans are inherently trust other humans more, on average, more than we trust machines in many, many contexts. So even if AI could do it at scale, I don't know that we will allow AI to do all the things that it in theory could do, or we'll want a human to back us up. And then as a species, we have a very honed survival instinct. I think that, again, I don't know where it's all going to go, but I think that humans want to survive and will take measures to allow us to do that. And I don't know what that means in the long run, but there are, I think, elements to this future that people don't talk about where I think they're actually protective factors for us. And so it's part of why I trust. I trust that we will figure this out as a species before it's a real problem.
I hope so. I definitely have an appreciation for what you're saying, because I know that I've talked to folks about, I use a lot of car analogies when we talk about some of this stuff, but in particular, just to your point about, trying to eliminate all the, drudgery kinds of work, the administrivia, whatever term you want to use. But there is, first of all, some people just don't mind doing it. I mean, they can just to come right out and say it's like a break for me, right? Like I need to, slow down. So I just equate it to your car. You can't just have the car running, redlining, all the time. Like it's the end is just gonna break, right? So you've got to be, at or near idle for a while. I don't mean idle like, completely standing still, but you've got to have some fluctuation in the intensity of the tasks that you're doing, just to give your brain a break and to allow it to sort of, generate new, brain cells and to, come up with ideas during those off peak kind of times. And so that totally makes sense to me. I think it also points to, part of what I think of when I think of the sort of umbrella of responsible innovation, responsible AI is using AI where you should, not wherever you can, right? Like if you have that sort of human centric lens, you say, well, this is a task, and maybe you need to look at the whole workflow or look at your day or look at, how you operate as an individual human being. These are the things that are healthy for me. And of course, inside an organization, you got to think about more than the individual, but still you need to look at this. What is, extrapolating that up to, a team or, a division, how does this help the entire operation? It goes back to your original point about, the end-to-end workflow. You've got to think about there's a bunch of humans involved here, and as much as we can try to either, automate or provide this decision support and offload some of the, maybe it's market research or whatever you're using AI to do, you still have humans as some of the connective tissue that ties it all together and provides the types of experiences that most people would would prefer to have. That there's a human somewhere that where I can just pull the ripcord and bail and just have a normal, hopefully relationship building or at least problem solving conversation with another human being, where the AI just either went off the rails or was clearly, not trusted in the moment.
Yeah. I think there's actually another, as you were saying this, there's another thing that I remembered that I also kind of lean into from a hopeful perspective that I thought I might share. So, have you ever heard of something called Jevons Paradox? I had not until recently. So, Jevons Paradox actually originated with respect to cars and the environmental impacts of cars. So, I forget when it was, maybe 70s. There was this big effort to make cars more environmentally friendly, right? To make them more energy efficient. And the thought was that our total pollution would go down because we were making it all more efficient. In practice, what actually happened is that pollution got worse because we just had many, many, many more cars on the road. And so this kind of is like a negative thing from a pollution standpoint, but it's a positive thing if you think about the impacts on a lot of jobs. So let's talk about software engineering. So software engineering right now is very hard to do. It's like you make a lot of money to be made in it currently because it's such a rare skill set. And as a result, there's a limit to how much software can be made in the world because there is just a limited resource pool. If we were to leverage AI to essentially produce the same amount of work that a 12-person team can do in a 4-person team, people are afraid that we'll just have, 1/3 fewer humans to do the work. But actually, what if we had 3 or 4 times the amount of work to be done, right? So that's the other thing to think about is like when our conception of the future is limited by our current worldview and our current constraints that we have on our plates today. But AI does more than automate it. It does more than take our existing job. It's going to fundamentally change a lot of things. And there is a certain amount of evidence to suggest that things that that it's going to be okay. Again, it's possible that we'll have, yes, teams of 3 people instead of teams of 12 building enterprise software, but we'll need double the number of people to do it because the demand will go up so much higher. Another example is radiography, actually. I was just reading that, I don't know, something a few years ago, some big AI luminary predicted that in 10 years there would be no more like radiographers. And actually, it turns out we have much, much more because demand went up. So again, I think that there are a lot of things that are scary, but there's actually a lot of things that are comforting, at least to me, in thinking about how this all might play out in the future.
Yeah, no, those are interesting examples. I mean, think about, what else we would do, like, if it's, time savings, if it's anything that we can sort of take off our plate, if you want to, categorize that under productivity, that's fine. But there's always other work to do as well, right? So not even getting into a sort of supply demand kind of thing. It's just, well, I guess you're always against those constraints inside a company, but I'm just thinking like there's always things that you're not able to do. So if you go through strategic planning, and the way we did this at NBC was like, must do, should do, and would be nice to do. Well, the would be nice to do never ever gets any money to do it because there's always too much being spent on the must do. If you're lucky, you'll get to do a couple of the things that you should do. Well, maybe now you can do most of the things that you should do, right? And those are not things that you can just give to AI and say, go nuts, right? Go build this product, go, run this project, whatever it is. And so it just frees up opportunities for other people who are ready to take on those additional, assignments. And chances are, especially at, large enterprises, digital native, companies, there's probably AI adoption is probably generally higher than maybe it would be in other places. And so as you increase the maturity of those initiatives and increase the frequency with which humans are working, collaboratively with AI, then those people who have those skills are going to be in the best position to take on that new work. So there's all kinds of things that or companies every quarter are going through. We have trade-offs. We have a limited budget, and here's where we're going to spend it. And so now it's like, what else? What are you going to do now that you have that additional capacity? How are you reinvesting the savings, whether it's time, money, whatever, and how are you going to reinvest that in the organization and the people within the organization that have continued to get you to this point and hopefully are part of your continued success, right?
Yeah, I agree. And I think a big part of that message is reminding executives today that the cuts that they're making are not strategic. It's kind of like we need to change a little bit of the narrative around AI from it's an efficiency provider, which it certainly can be, but it actually, as you say, it can be an accelerator for business. Like there's a lot of things. I mean, I love your point. There's a lot of things that companies wish they could do that they just don't have capacity to do. Well, what if they did? Like, imagine like the propulsion from a business perspective that would exist. And I think some of this is just, you know, I think society will push for that. I think governments will end up pushing for that. So I think that will also be a very critical factor in how AI gets leveraged, or at least how humans are being leveraged relative to AI. I see it as a big potential for new and exciting work that drives society forward.
Yeah. The Forrester future work thing that you cited where they were saying like, could be 50% reduction in HR. I mean, I don't have access to read the whole report, but is the nature of that tied to the maturity level of the HR organization? In other words, that's going to happen because most companies still think of HR as sort of a cost center as opposed to a growth driver?
I mean, I wasn't the analyst that wrote that, but what I can tell you is compared to other functions, supply chain, marketing, IT, HR has been very much insulated from a lot of the existing just straight automation activities that have occurred in other fields or other verticals. So I think that a big chunk of what the 50% prediction was around was automating, not really Gen AI enabled, but like automating stuff that could have been automated 5 years ago and just wasn't. So I think that's a big piece of it. I mean, speaking, let's just say from a learning perspective, like I look at most L&D organizations and they are not learning organizations. They are training, content development, and delivery organizations, which is not the same thing as how do we get people to learn stuff and behave in new ways and have new skills. So to me, like even if we were to largely leverage AI to do all of the content related stuff, and it's not perfect, but let's say we could do a lot of it. That just frees up time for people to do what the business actually has always needed them to do and really needs them to do now, which is actually get people to learn stuff. So I think that the disruption in HR is going to be stuff that should have been disrupted but wasn't and will now happen. And then it will be the use of AI to do things, to give us the capacity to do our jobs better, actually, in ways that we should have been doing, but for whatever reason, we're not able to. So at least in the learning space, and I think in HR more broadly, though I think there will be some initial disruption, I think the end result is going to be better for employees and the business and HR practitioners.
That's a positive outlook. I like it. Sandra, when we talked last time, you talked about like these four, in relation to AI literacy, you talked about this sort of meta literacy over these different elements, right? So the technology, I'll let you dig into these. There's a technology piece, there's the process piece, there's a data and infrastructure piece, and then of course the the people. Can you just, sort of unpack that a little bit so people kind of get a frame of when we talk about in general, sort of ready, you could call it just, future proofing yourself. It doesn't have to be labeled as AI, readiness, even though there's probably some elements of AI within each of those pillars.
Yeah, I think it's so, and we actually have discussed all four of those elements today. But when you think about what is required for AI to create impact in an organization, you have to think about it in terms of these four big things, right? So one is the technology related to AI. So we've talked about the general purpose models. We've talked about synthetic agents and digital twins. There's also orchestrators. Like that's the technology piece. And so most companies, when they're talking about AI, are really exclusively talking about the technology aspect. The technology aspect can't create value without the other three things. And those are process reengineering, as we discussed at the very beginning, taking existing processes, completely redesigning them, creating new processes, and then applying AI very natively to those new processes. The third big element is the data infrastructure required to support the agents, know if your processes are working, and actually provide all of that context that we were talking about. That is another huge unlock that companies have to invest in order for the other, for AI and process to actually make sense. And of course, the last and very much not least element is people. Getting them not just to initially adopt AI in order to help figure out what are the use cases, what should we be redesigning, but then, as the processes are kind of hardened a little bit, like the new ones kind of become more real, as jobs are changing, we need to actually document that for people, change incentive structures, change their job descriptions, get them to work in new ways. Like there's so much that goes into it. And I think that a lot of even CEOs are not thinking about AI through all four of those lenses. But every single one of them is required to see real AI impact, which is, again, why I say it's so complicated. And the timeline for real productivity gains it's not close yet at scale. And I really think that people leaders need to understand all four of those things. It's just like from a foundational literacy perspective, and also be thinking about their role relative to getting people to adopt the technology, to work on improving the processes, to help create the documentation that is required from data perspective. And I think it's a big job, and we need to understand the scope of our work relative to the big picture around AI transformation.
Wow. Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I like the way you're framing that, and I think it sort of puts a bookend on all those topics that we dove into earlier. And yeah, just such important message for most people to really start embracing the technology if they haven't already. So no, I think that's excellent advice. The last sort of thought I had was I was just curious about what you might sort of play with when you're not thinking about some of these heady problems and you're just at home on the weekends or whatever. Any particular AI use cases or tools that you're particularly intrigued by or concerned about?
So my company has this incredibly cool thing that's called Dial. I don't know what that stands for, but what it does is it takes most of the large language models and it puts it all in one place. And so I go to this one place and I can actually put in one prompt and see how several different models respond to it. And so, because of that, I have begun to appreciate that the models actually are useful for different use cases. And my primary use case is research, helping me write. So thinking with me about stuff, I'll give it some, I want you to talk about, these 3 points. What do you think about this? What am I missing? And so my current favorite tool is Claude Opus 4.1, I think it is. It is fantastic. I've been so impressed with it. But, who knows? Tomorrow, another tool might come out that I can use. But what I just love, and I hope, and many, some companies have this, not all of them, but being able to access from one place a bunch of different things and compare them is actually extremely helpful, because all of the models are tuned a little bit differently. And so they're actually better at certain things. And for a bunch of tasks, it's helpful to see how they compare, and you can pick and choose pieces of them to get what it is that you really want.
Very cool. Yeah, I remember we had at IBM, research had come up with a bunch of different like search engines, and you could put in, there was one of them where you could put in your search topic, and then it would go and fetch results from 4 different places, and you could just sort of pick and choose which one was great. No, I think that's super useful. Awesome. Sandra, thank you so much for spending so much time with me and my listeners. I think there's a lot of great insight that you shared, so really, really appreciate it. And yeah, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. This was really fun. I appreciate the space to talk about important topics like this.
Awesome. Yeah, my pleasure. All right, everyone. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.